If you've been studying Chinese for a while and feel like you're not making the progress you should be, it's not that you're not working hard enough. More often than not, it comes down to a few misconceptions you picked up early on that nobody ever corrected. And when those are off, you can put in all the hours in the world and still feel stuck. I've been teaching Chinese for years, and I see the same patterns come up again and again, the same frustrations, usually traceable back to the same handful of misconceptions. So today, I want to put those on the table. If even one of these clicks for you, I think it will genuinely change how you study. Chinese doesn't behave like most of the languages you've probably studied before. And because of that, people tend to carry over instincts and habits that work fine for French or Spanish, but completely backfire here. Once you understand how Chinese actually operates, a lot of things that seemed impossible start to feel manageable. Okay, let's get into it. Misconception number 1. Chinese grammar has to be precise, or people won't understand you. This is the one that keeps beginners silent for way too long. You're so scared of saying something grammatically wrong that you just don't say. You wait, you study more, and you tell yourself you will speak when you're ready. And ready actually never comes. Here's what I tell my students. Chinese grammar is genuinely one of the most flexible systems in any major language. Compare that to English for a second. Think about how many ways English needs to mark the time. I am at the library today. I was at the library yesterday. I will be in the library tomorrow. 3 completely different verb forms. In Chinese, 我今天在图书馆。我昨天在图书馆。我明天在图书馆。The verb 在 doesn't change at all. 今天、昨天、明天 do all the work. Time words are all that you need. The verbs aren't carrying that burden. And it goes further than that. In Chinese, you can drop the subject entirely and it sounds completely natural. Let's see an example. A daily conversation could be like this. 昨天去哪儿了？去图书馆了。借书了吗？借了2本。If we translate this word by word, it would sound like this. Yesterday went where? Went library. Borrow a book? Borrow 2. Nobody said 我, which means I, even once in that entire conversation. No subject, no problem. That's the flexibility I'm talking about. The language trusts context. So if you're someone who freezes before speaking because your sentence isn't perfectly constructed, stop. Say the imperfect sentence. Chinese will cover for you more than you think. Misconception number 2. You need to learn to write characters before you can start using the language. I get where this comes from. Chinese characters are the most visually striking part of the language. But this belief eats up hundreds of hours of people's study time for very little return. And I've watched it happen too many times. Think about what your actual goal is. If you want to speak Chinese, to travel, to have conversations, to watch shows, handwriting characters is almost completely irrelevant to that goal. And if you want to read Chinese, what you actually need is to recognize characters, not produce them from scratch with a pen. When you text someone in Chinese, you type pinyin and pick from a list. When you read a menu or a news article, your brain needs to identify the characters, not recreate it stroke by stroke. Let me put it this way. Take the character 赢, which means to win, for an example. It has 17 strokes. Drilling that from memory takes serious time. But recognizing it, learning what it means on sight, you can do that in about 60 seconds. The time you'd spend drilling the handwriting of 赢 could go toward learning 30 new words or practicing actual conversations, or building the kind of reading recognition that lets you consume real Chinese content. So focus on reading recognition and pinyin input first. Handwriting is a beautiful skill, but treat it as a bonus. Misconception number 3. The more vocabulary I memorize, the more fluent I will be. There's a very seductive logic to this one. Chinese has so many characters, so many words, so surely the problem is just not knowing enough of them yet. So you download Anki, build decks, grind through hundreds of flashcards every morning, and feel productive. You really do. And then you sit across from a native speaker and your mind goes completely blank. The thing is, there's a huge difference between knowing a word and being able to use it in real time. One lives in your memory, the other lives in your mouth. And you can't build the second one by training only the first. Here's a simple example I use with my students. You might have memorized that 尴尬 means awkward. It's in your deck, you've reviewed it 15 times, but if someone tells you an awkward story, you want to respond naturally, can you actually drop 尴尬 into a sentence on the spot without thinking about it? Flashcards teach you recognition, they don't teach you production, and fluency is almost entirely about production. The shift I always recommend: for every chunk of time you spend on vocabulary, spend at least an equal amount of time actually using it. Say sentences out loud. Find a language partner if you can, or just record yourself talking. Anything that forces the word out of the passive memory and into active use. Misconception number 4. Chinese is so hard it will take forever. Maybe it's just not worth starting. The US Foreign Service Institute famously characterizes Mandarin as a Category 4 language, the hardest category for English speakers, estimating around 2,200 classroom hours to reach professional proficiency. People see that number and quietly close the tab. But a couple of things about that number. First, professional proficiency means diplomat-level Chinese, negotiating trade agreements, reading legal documents, giving formal speeches. That is not the bar most people are trying to reach. For being able to hold real conversations, travel, make friends, watch C-drama, most learners get there in a year to 18 months of consistent effort. Very different picture. And second, as someone who grew up with this language and has spent years teaching it, I think Chinese gets a bit of an unfair reputation because there are things about it that are actually easier than some of the European languages that nobody talks about that enough. No verb conjugation at all. In Spanish, I went, you went, he went, we went, and they went is fui, fuiste, fue, fuimos, fueron. 5 different forms. In Chinese, it's just 去. Every time form, every person, done. And no gendered nouns, no subjunctive, no cases. The core sentence structure is actually pretty intuitive once you get used to it. Chinese is hard, yes, but in specific ways, like the characters get way more manageable once you stop seeing them as random shapes and start understanding how they actually work. That's a whole other video. Don't let the scary statistics about diplomat training talk you out of a language that millions of people around the world have learned and loved. So, to bring it back, 4 misconceptions. 4 things I hope you will unlearn after watching this. Grammar doesn't need to be perfect because Chinese is contextual in a way that covers for you. Handwriting isn't a prerequisite. Recognition is what matters for modern learners. Vocabulary alone won't make you fluent. Output practice is the missing piece. And Chinese isn't impossibly hard, it's just differently hard. If any of this was useful, leave a comment, especially if there's a misconception I didn't cover that you've run into yourself. I'm curious what comes up for you. 好的，下次见。